In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where ancient civilizations trade in currencies of power, knowledge, and fear, there exists one unwritten rule that even the most powerful empires have learned to respect. Never, under any circumstances, let a human owe you a debt. It's not because humans are the strongest. The Krillian Empire could crush Earth with a single battle fleet. It's not because they're the smartest. The ethereal collective's minds operate on levels humans can barely comprehend. And it's certainly not because they're the most advanced. Human technology is laughably primitive compared to species that have conquered space for millennia. No, the reason the galaxy fears human debts is far more terrifying than raw power or superior intellect. It's because when a human says, "I owe you one," they don't just mean it. They mean it with an intensity that defies all logic, all reason, and all self-preservation instincts. The Galactic Council learned this lesson the hard way when they saved a single human colony from extinction, expecting nothing more than gratitude. What they got instead changed the balance of power across 12 star systems and left 3 ancient empires questioning everything they thought they knew about warfare, loyalty, and the true meaning of honor. This is the story of how humanity's greatest weakness became their most feared strength, and why the phrase human debt is now whispered in the darkest corners of the galaxy with a mixture of awe and terror. Ambassador Zexhai of the Ethereal Collective stood at the observation deck of the massive Galactic Council dreadnought, watching the dying planet below with something that might have been regret in a being capable of such emotions. The human colony world of New Pacifica was entering its final death spiral, consumed by a plague that had already claimed 90% of its population. The plague itself was not remarkable by galactic standards. The Void Seekers had unleashed far worse biological weapons across dozens of worlds in their endless hunger for destruction. What made this particular catastrophe noteworthy was the complete inability of human medical science to combat it. Their primitive understanding of quantum genetics left them helpless against a pathogen that rewrote its own DNA structure every few hours. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the surface," reported Communications Officer the Eilon, her crystalline form shimmering with the stress patterns that indicated emotional discomfort. "It's from someone called Governor Martinez." Zexhai's elongated skull tilted slightly, a gesture that passed for curiosity among his species. "The same human who has been broadcasting for the past 3 rotations?" "Yes, sir." She's still asking for help. The ambassador allowed himself a moment of what humans might call amazement. Below them, a world was dying. The population had dropped from 12 million to barely 800,000 in the span of 6 standard months. Their cities were graveyards, their fields burned, their technology failing as the survivors struggled to maintain even basic infrastructure. Yet this Governor Martinez continued to transmit requests for aid with the persistence of a malfunctioning beacon. "Patch it through," Zexhai commanded. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a woman who looked far older than her actual years. Governor Elena Martinez had the hollow eyes and gaunt features of someone who had watched her world die piece by piece. Her uniform was stained and torn, her hair unkempt, but her voice remained steady as she began her transmission. "This is Governor Martinez of New Pacifica Colony, broadcasting on all frequencies to any vessel in range. We are in desperate need of medical assistance. Our population has been decimated by an unknown pathogen, and our remaining medical facilities are overwhelmed. We have 837,000 survivors in need of immediate evacuation or treatment. We have nothing to offer in return except our gratitude, and our word that this debt would not be forgotten." Thailand's form pulsed with uncomfortable patterns. "Sir, this is the 47th transmission of this nature. Should we continue to ignore it?" Zexhai studied the human face on the display. There was something unsettling about the way Martinez spoke. Not pleading, not begging, but simply stating facts with an intensity that seemed to burn through the transmission itself. The phrase about debt being unforgotten lingered in his consciousness like an echo. "Tactical analysis Zexai requested. The ship's AI responded immediately with its crystalline voice. New Pacifica holds no strategic value, no rare minerals, no unique resources, no tactical position of importance. The human colony was established primarily for agricultural purposes and has no military installations of note. The cost of medical intervention would be substantial with no material benefit to the Council. It was a perfectly logical assessment. The ethereal collective prided itself on cold rationality. They had not risen to become one of the galaxy's three great powers by making emotional decisions about primitive species. Yet something about the humans' transmission bothered Zexai in a way he could not quantify. "Sir," Dylon interrupted, her patterns now showing urgent concern. "Long-range sensors are detecting void seeker vessels entering the system. 3 hunter-killers and what appears to be a harvester ship." Zexai's primary consciousness split instantly, processing multiple probability streams. The Void Seekers were drawn to dying worlds like scavengers to carrion. They would harvest whatever biological matter remained, add any useful genetic patterns to their collective, and strip the planet of resources. It was their nature, as inevitable as gravity. "Time to intercept. 4 hours until they reach orbit," Dylon reported. "Zethai kan gulet za PD." The Council dreadnought could easily destroy the Void Seeker vessels, but doing so would serve no strategic purpose. The humans would die whether from plague or harvesting. The logical choice was clear: withdraw and allow the Void Seekers to claim what remained. Yet he found himself hesitating. On the display, Governor Martinez was repeating her transmission. The same words, the same steady voice, the same burning intensity in her eyes. 800,000 humans, waiting for a salvation that would never come. "Sir," Dylon prompted. "Contact Medical Bay 7, Zexai said suddenly. "Tell them to prepare the quantum resonance chambers for mass biological treatment, and signal the fleet to form defensive positions." The silence on the bridge was palpable. Even the ethereal collective, masters of emotional suppression, could not entirely hide their shock. "Sir," the tactical officer ventured, "the cost analysis indicates." "I am aware of the cost analysis." Zexai turned from the display, his form shimmering with decision patterns. "There are factors beyond material cost that must be considered." What those factors were, he could not entirely articulate. Perhaps it was the mathematical elegance of preserving a unique genetic pattern. Perhaps it was the strategic value of establishing goodwill with an emerging species. Or perhaps it was something far more primitive, something that even the highly evolved ethereal collective had not entirely transcended. The medical intervention began immediately. Quantum resonance chambers were devices of breathtaking complexity, capable of rewriting biological structures at the cellular level. Each chamber cost more than some entire star systems generated in a year, and the Galactic Council had only 12 of them in existence. Zexai ordered 6 to be transported to New Pacifica's surface. The process was not gentle. Humans screamed as their DNA was forcibly restructured, as foreign quantum patterns burned through their nervous systems, as their bodies fought against the healing that was being imposed upon them. But it worked. The plague that had resisted every human medical technique crumbled before technology that operated on principles their science could not even recognize. Within 48 hours, the dying stopped. Within a week, the plague was completely eradicated. Within 2 weeks, the quantum chambers had healed not just the survivors, but had restored them to perfect health, eliminating generations of genetic damage and extending their lifespans by decades. The Void Seekers arrived to find their expected feast replaced by a thriving human colony and a Galactic Council battle fleet. They withdrew without engaging, confused by the illogical preservation of what should have been carrion. Governor Martinez's final transmission was unlike all the others. She stood in what appeared to be a hastily constructed government building, surrounded by human officials whose faces showed a mixture of gratitude and something else. Something Zexai found difficult to interpret. "Ambassador Zexai of the Ethereal Collective," she began, and the formal use of his name surprised him. They had never actually communicated directly. On behalf of the survivors of New Pacifica and all of humanity, I want to express our gratitude for your intervention. You saved 800,000 lives when you had no obligation to do so. She paused, and her expression became something that HFY would later remember with perfect clarity. I want you to know that humanity does not forget its debts. We are aware that the cost of your medical intervention far exceeded any possible material benefit you might have gained. We are aware that you acted purely from what we would call compassion. This debt to you and the Galactic Council will not be forgotten. When the time comes, and it will come, we will repay what we owe, regardless of the cost to ourselves. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in unusual silence. Sir, Thylon said carefully, what did she mean about repayment? The humans have no resources we require. Their technology is primitive. Their military capability is negligible. HFY found himself staring at the now-blank display, processing patterns of thought that felt foreign even to his expanded consciousness. There had been something in the human's voice, something in her eyes, that suggested meanings beyond her words. File a complete report of this incident with the Council archives, he ordered. Include full biological and psychological profiles of the human responses. I believe we may have initiated something significant. Sir, nothing, HFY said, though he continued to stare at the empty display. Perhaps nothing at all. But even as he spoke, he was calculating probabilities, running scenarios, trying to understand why a simple act of preservation felt like the first move in a game whose rules he did not yet comprehend. On the surface of New Pacifica, Governor Martinez stood in her temporary office and stared out at the crowds of humans working to rebuild their world. They moved with purpose now, with a kind of focused intensity that had not existed before. Every conversation seemed to eventually turn to the same topic, the debt, not the financial cost. Humans understood that they could never repay the Council in traditional terms. But debts, Martinez had learned, were not always about money. Sometimes they were about honor. Sometimes they were about proving that gratitude meant something beyond mere words. And sometimes, when the stakes were high enough, debts became the foundation upon which entire civilizations were willing to sacrifice everything. She turned back to her desk, where reports from across human space waited for her attention. Word of the Council's intervention had spread rapidly through human communication networks. The response had been interesting. Every human world, every colony, every settlement from the core worlds to the furthest frontier had sent the same message. Whatever debt New Pacifica owed, humanity as a whole claimed it as their own. 800,000 saved lives had somehow become the responsibility of all 12 billion humans scattered across 43 star systems. Martinez understood the impulse, even if she could not entirely explain it to alien minds. Humans, she had often observed, were peculiar creatures when it came to obligation. They would argue about trivial matters for centuries, fight wars over philosophical differences, and split into countless factions over the smallest disagreements. But when it came to genuine debt, real obligation born from real sacrifice, they became something else entirely. Something that perhaps even they did not fully understand. She opened the first report and began to read about shipyard production's increases, about scientific research being redirected toward projects that might someday benefit the Galactic Council, about military recruitment numbers that had doubled in the past month. Humanity was preparing to pay its debt, though none of them yet knew what form that payment might take. Martinez smiled grimly and continued reading. The galaxy, she suspected, was about to receive an education in human nature that it had not requested and was not prepared for. In the depths of space, Ambassador HFY filed his report and tried to dismiss the growing certainty that the ethereal collective had just made a decision whose consequences would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. The debt had been born. What remained to be seen was what form its payment would take, and whether the galaxy would survive the transaction 0.3 standard years after the New Pacifica incident, Admiral Karath of the Krillian Empire found himself facing a problem he had never encountered in 4 centuries of military service. Humans were volunteering for suicide missions that they had not been asked to undertake. The current crisis had begun 6 months earlier, when Void Seeker hives had erupted from the galactic rim in numbers not seen for millennia. 3 entire star systems had been consumed before the major powers had recognized the scale of the threat. The Krillian war machine, the Ethereal Collective's tactical brilliance, and the Trade Federation's economic warfare capabilities had all proven insufficient against the sheer biomass of the Seeker swarm. The breaking point came at the Helios Junction, where the remnants of the Galactic Council's Third Fleet made their desperate last stand. 67 ships against a Void Seeker biomass that stretched across 3 light minutes of space. The mathematics were brutally simple. The Council fleet would be absorbed within hours, and nothing would remain to prevent the swarm from reaching the populated core systems, which made the sudden appearance of the human fleet all the more inexplicable. Admiral, his communications officer reported, her voice carrying the stress harmonics that indicated imminent panic. "We're receiving transmission from the human vessels. They're requesting permission to engage the Seeker biomass." Karatha's massive frame shifted in his command chair, causing the reinforced structure to emit small groans of protest. "How many ships?" 43, sir. Mixed-class vessels, all of human construction. The Admiral's twin hearts began beating in an arrhythmic pattern that indicated profound confusion. Human military technology was primitive by galactic standards. Their ships were slow, their weapons crude, their defensive systems laughably inadequate. 43 human vessels against a Void Seeker swarm was not warfare. It was an elaborate form of species suicide. "Sir," the tactical officer added, "we're also detecting unusual readings from the human fleet. Their ships appear to have been modified." "In what manner?" "Unknown, sir. The modifications are unlike anything in our databases." Karath activated his personal communication array. "Human fleet, this is Admiral Karath of the Krillian Empire. Your vessels are not equipped for engagement with Void Seeker biomass. Withdraw immediately and leave the engagement zone." The response came from a voice that sounded impossibly calm given the circumstances. "Admiral Karath, this is Captain Elena Santos of the human vessel Resolution. We appreciate your concern, but we must respectfully decline your suggestion." "Captain Santos, I am not making a suggestion. I am giving you a direct order based on tactical reality. Your weapons cannot penetrate Seeker bioarmor. Your ships cannot survive contact with their absorption fields. You will accomplish nothing except adding your biomass to their collective. Perhaps, Admiral, but we have a debt to settle." The communication ended, leaving Karath staring at his display in bewilderment. A debt? What possible debt could justify such obvious suicide? His confusion deepened as he watched the human ships move into formation. They were not arranging themselves in any recognizable attack pattern. Instead, they seemed to be positioning themselves in a perfect sphere around the Seeker biomass, maintaining precise distances that served no tactical purpose he could identify. "Sir," the sensor officer announced, "the human ships are powering up some kind of unknown energy system. Power signatures are..." "Sir, the readings don't make sense." "Explain." "Each human vessel appears to be generating energy equivalent to our main battle cruisers. But their reactors shouldn't be capable of such output. They should have overloaded and exploded by now." Karath watched as the human formation completed its positioning. 43 primitive ships, arranged in perfect geometric harmony around a biomass that could absorb entire fleets. It was either the most elaborate suicide ritual he had ever witnessed, or "Admiral," the communications officer called out, her voice now carrying overtones of genuine terror. "We're receiving a broad-spectrum transmission from Captain Santos. She's broadcasting to all ships in the system. Put it through." Captain Santos' image appeared on the main display. She was a woman of perhaps 40 human years, wearing a uniform that had been modified with symbols and markings that meant nothing to Karath. Behind her, He could see her bridge crew working with the focused intensity of beings who had accepted their own deaths. To all vessels in the Helios Junction, Santos began. 3 years ago, the Galactic Council saved 800,000 human lives on New Pacifica when they had no obligation to do so. The cost of that intervention was calculated at approximately 12 billion galactic standard credits, plus the irreplaceable expenditure of quantum medical technology. She paused, and her expression became something that Karath found deeply unsettling. Humanity does not forget its debts. What you are about to witness is the first payment on what we owe. The ethereal collective gave us life when we had no right to expect it. Today, we return that gift in the currency we understand best. The transmission ended, and immediately every human ship began broadcasting the same message simultaneously for New Pacifica. Payment on account. What happened next would be debated by galactic military theorists for centuries. The human ships did not fire weapons. Instead, they synchronized their unknown energy systems and created what appeared to be a massive containment field around the Voidseeker biomass. But as sensor readings poured in, Karath realized that what he was witnessing was far beyond any known containment technology. "Sir," the sensor officer reported, his voice carrying the flat tones of someone whose mind was refusing to process what his instruments were telling him. "The human ships they're converting themselves into some kind of resonance matrix. They're using their own hull structures as components in a massive energy pattern. That's impossible. The energy requirements alone would. Sir, the first human ship just went critical. But instead of exploding, it's becoming part of the matrix. The energy from its destruction is being channeled through the other vessels." Karath watched in horrified fascination as the human fleet began to systematically destroy itself in perfect sequence. Each ship overloaded its reactors at precisely calculated intervals, and each explosion fed energy into a growing pattern that now surrounded the Void Seeker swarm like a cage of pure force. But it was not a cage designed to contain. As more ships added their energy to the matrix, Karath began to understand the true purpose of what he was witnessing. The humans had not come to fight the Void Seekers. They had come to create a weapon that required their own destruction to function. "Admiral," the tactical officer announced, "the resonance pattern is reaching critical stability. At current rate of ship loss, the matrix will be complete in 17 minutes. And then?" "Unknown, sir. But energy readings suggest, sir, they appear to be building some kind of dimensional displacement weapon. The power requirements are beyond anything in our databases. 17 minutes. 43 ships, dying in precise sequence to create a weapon that should not be possible with their level of technology." Karath found himself wondering what kind of species would conceive such a plan, let alone execute it. The answer came as the last human ship, the Resolution, began its final overload sequence. Captain Santos appeared one final time on the communication array. "Admiral Karath," she said, and her voice carried the strange peace of someone who had found perfect purpose in her final moments. "Please inform Ambassador Zexhai of the Ethereal Collective that this payment is offered with gratitude. Tell him that human debts are always settled, regardless of cost." The Resolution exploded in a burst of energy that completed the matrix, and space itself seemed to twist around the Void Seeker biomass. The swarm, which had been moving inexorably toward the core systems, suddenly found itself somewhere else entirely. Karath's sensors showed empty space where moments before a fleet-consuming biomass had threatened the galaxy. The humans had not destroyed the Void Seekers. They had moved them, transported them instantly to coordinates that would take the fleet computers several minutes to calculate. When the calculations were complete, Karath stared at the results with something approaching religious awe. The Void Seeker swarm had been displaced to the galactic edge, approximately 40,000 light-years from any inhabited system. At their maximum traveling speed, it would take them 8 centuries to return to the galaxy's populated regions. 43 human ships and their crews had sacrificed themselves to buy the galaxy 800 years of peace. The silence on Karatha's bridge was finally broken by his communications officer. "Sir, we're receiving a message from Earth. It's being broadcast on all channels throughout human space." "Put it through." The image that appeared showed a human female in what appeared to be governmental attire. Behind her, Karath could see symbols that he now recognized as memorials for the 43 ships. "Citizens of the galaxy," she began, "my name is Director Chun of the Human Colonial Authority. Today, 43 human vessels and their crews gave their lives to implement a defensive strategy against the Void Seeker threat. This action was taken as partial payment on humanity's debt to the Galactic Council for their intervention at New Pacifica 3 years ago." She paused, and Karath noticed that her expression carried the same intensity he had seen in Captain Santos. "The sacrifice of these crews has purchased the galaxy approximately 8 centuries of safety from this particular threat. We consider this a down payment on our obligation. Humanity stands ready to continue servicing this debt as circumstances require." The transmission ended, leaving Karath alone with thoughts that felt too large for his consciousness to contain. Around him, his bridge crew worked in unusual silence, processing sensor data and battle reports with mechanical efficiency. But Karath found himself thinking about mathematics. 43 ships lost to save dozens of core systems. 800 years of peace purchased with the lives of volunteers who had asked for nothing except the opportunity to die for strangers. The tactical computer chimed softly, indicating that full analysis of the human action was complete. Karath reviewed the data with growing amazement. The humans had not simply sacrificed their ships. They had created an entirely new form of warfare. The resonance matrix they had built was theoretically impossible with their level of technology, yet they had achieved it through what could only be described as controlled self-destruction. His tactical officer approached with hesitant steps. "Admiral, there's something else. We've been analyzing the modifications to the human ships, and, sir, they appear to have been planning this specific mission for over 2 years." "Explain." "The modifications were not hasty preparations, sir. Every system, every component was precisely calculated for this exact scenario. They knew they would face Void Seekers. They knew they would need to create a dimensional displacement, and they knew exactly how many ships it would require." Karatha's twin hearts began beating in perfect synchronization, a physiological response that indicated deep contemplation. They prepared for a suicide mission that might never be necessary? "Yes, sir. For 2 years, they maintained a fleet whose sole purpose was to die in defense of galactic civilization." The Admiral turned back to his main display, where the empty space once occupied by the Void Seeker swarm served as a monument to human incomprehensibility. 43 crews had volunteered to spend 2 years preparing for their own deaths, training for a mission that would leave no survivors, perfecting technology that existed only to destroy itself, all to repay a debt that no one had asked them to acknowledge. "Send a message to the ethereal collective," Karath ordered. "Inform Ambassador Zexhai that humanity has made their first debt payment, and include my personal assessment that the galaxy may not be prepared for the magnitude of their gratitude." As a ship began moving away from the Helios Junction, Karath found himself wondering what other preparations humanity might be making in the name of debt repayment. The thought was both fascinating and deeply disturbing. Behind them, 43 debris fields slowly dispersed into the cosmic void, each one a testament to the discovery that humanity's greatest strength lay not in their technology or their strategy, but in their absolute refusal to leave obligations unfulfilled. The galaxy was beginning to understand that they had not simply saved a human colony 3 years ago. They had awakened something that thought in terms far beyond simple gratitude. They had created a species-wide sense of obligation that would not rest until the debt was fully paid, regardless of what that payment might cost. Ambassador Zexhai stood in the center of the Galactic Council's emergency assembly chamber, surrounded by holographic representations of the most powerful beings in known space. 7 years had passed since New Pacifica, and the human debt had evolved into something that none of them had anticipated. The current crisis was unlike anything the Council had faced in its 3,000-year history. The Phantom Syndicate, a criminal organization that had operated from the shadows for centuries, had finally made their move for open galactic domination. They had corrupted governments, infiltrated military commands, and turned entire star systems into puppet states through a combination of advanced technology and ruthless manipulation. What made them truly dangerous was their mastery of consciousness transfer technology. Syndicate agents could inhabit the bodies of government officials, military commanders, and civilian leaders without detection. Trust had become impossible when anyone could be a hidden enemy wearing a familiar face. Three major powers had already fallen to syndicate infiltration. The Trade Federation had collapsed overnight when their ruling council was revealed to be entirely composed of syndicate puppets. The hegemony of free worlds had destroyed itself in a civil war when nobody could determine who was still genuinely loyal. Even the mighty Krillian Empire was showing signs of internal corruption that threatened their unity. The Galactic Council itself was paralyzed by suspicion. Every decision could be influenced by hidden enemies. Every vote could be compromised. The very foundation of galactic civilization was crumbling under the weight of an enemy that could be anyone, anywhere, at any time. "The situation is untenable," declared Counselor Vorth of the Aquatic Alliance, his translated voice carrying overtones of desperation. "We cannot govern when we cannot trust our own thoughts to remain private." Zexhai reviewed the tactical assessments with growing despair. The Phantom Syndicate had spent centuries infiltrating every major institution in the galaxy. Their consciousness transfer technology was so advanced that even their own people did not know who was still genuinely human and who was now a syndicate puppet. "What defensive measures remain available?" asked Counselor THYSS of the Crystal Collective. "Limited options," Zexhai admitted. "Our counterintelligence operations have been compromised. Our military commands are infiltrated. Our technological solutions have been anticipated and countered. The Syndicate appears to have planned for every conventional response." The chamber fell silent as the implications settled over the assembled representatives. The greatest powers in the galaxy, collectively capable of reshaping star systems and commanding the loyalty of trillions of beings, had been outmaneuvered by an enemy they could not see and could not fight. "There is one possibility," Zexhai continued, though he felt profound reluctance to voice what he was considering. "The humans have requested an opportunity to address the Council regarding their outstanding debt." The silence that greeted this statement was different from the previous quiet. It carried undertones of confusion, curiosity, and something that might have been hope. The humans? Counselor Vorth's patterns showed bewilderment. What possible assistance could they provide? Their technology remains primitive, their military forces are negligible, and they have no intelligence-gathering capabilities that could penetrate syndicate operations. Zexhai accessed the files he had been maintaining on human activities since the New Pacifica incident. What he found there had been gradually causing him increasing concern for several years. "Their debt repayment activities have been extensive," he reported carefully. Following the Helios Junction incident, human colonies throughout their space began implementing what they termed preparedness protocols. They appear to have been anticipating the need for additional debt payments. "What form have these preparations taken?" asked Counselor THYSS. Zexhai hesitated before answering. The human activities were unlike anything in his databases, and he was not entirely certain how to categorize them. "They have been modifying themselves," he said finally. The chamber erupted in confused questioning, but Zexhai continued his explanation. "Over the past 5 years, human colonies have been voluntarily undergoing genetic modifications, cybernetic enhancements, and consciousness alterations. They appear to have been preparing for scenarios we have not yet encountered. Modifications for what purpose? Unknown. But their request to address the Council suggests they believe their preparations are relevant to our current situation." The debate that followed was heated and complex, touching on issues of policy, precedent, and practicality. In the end, The Council agreed to hear the human proposal primarily because no other options remained available. The human representative who appeared via hologram was unlike anything Zexai had expected. The woman who identified herself as Director Sarah Kim appeared to be standard human baseline, but something about her presence suggested depths that were not immediately visible. "Honorable counselors," she began, "humanity has been aware of the Phantom Syndicate threat for approximately 4 years. We have been preparing our response as part of our ongoing debt repayment to the Council." Counselor Vorth's patterns showed skepticism. How could humans have detected a threat that escaped our notice? Director Kim smiled, and the expression carried implications that Zexai found deeply unsettling. "We have been developing specialized detection capabilities. The Syndicate's consciousness transfer technology creates quantum resonance patterns that human neurology can be modified to perceive directly." She paused, allowing this information to settle before continuing. "We can identify Syndicate agents with perfect accuracy. We can track their technological signatures across vast distances. And we have developed countermeasures that render their infiltration techniques ineffective." The silence in the chamber was profound. "You're claiming," Counselor THYSS said carefully, "that humanity has solved a problem that has defeated our combined technological capabilities?" "We're claiming that we have prepared ourselves to solve it," Director Kim corrected, "as part of our debt repayment obligation." Zexai felt compelled to ask the question that was bothering him most. "What form have your preparations taken?" Director Kim's expression became something that would haunt his memory for years afterward. "We have modified approximately 30% of our population to function as living Syndicate detection systems. These individuals have undergone neurological restructuring that allows them to perceive consciousness transfer activity in real time." She activated a secondary display that showed detailed biological scans. "We have enhanced another 20% of our population with cybernetic integration that makes them immune to Syndicate consciousness transfer techniques. These individuals can operate in completely compromised environments without risk of infiltration." The biological data was staggering. Humans had voluntarily undergone modifications that changed the fundamental nature of their neurology, their consciousness, and, in some cases, their basic humanity. "The remaining 50% of our population," Director Kim continued, "has been trained and equipped to implement what we term scorched earth protocols against Syndicate infiltration. These individuals are prepared to sacrifice anything, including their own lives and civilizations, to prevent Syndicate victory." Counselor Vorth's patterns showed profound confusion. "You have modified your entire species for a war that had not yet been declared." "We have prepared to repay our debt," Director Kim corrected. "The form that repayment takes is determined by galactic necessity, not by our preferences." Zexai found himself accessing probability calculations at a rate that strained his consciousness. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Complete Syndicate elimination within 18 months, Director Kim stated with the same casual tone she might use to discuss weather patterns. "We will identify every agent, track every safe house, and neutralize every technological asset they possess. When we are finished, the Phantom Syndicate will exist only as a historical curiosity." "And the cost?" Director Kim's smile became something that would later be classified as one of the most terrifying expressions ever recorded in Council archives. "The cost is irrelevant. We have a debt to settle." The operation that followed became known as the Great Cleansing, though humans simply referred to it as Debt Payment Number 2. What the galaxy witnessed over the following 18 months redefined their understanding of warfare, dedication, and the lengths to which humans would go to honor their obligations. The modified humans proved capable of feats that seemed impossible even by advanced galactic standards. They could identify Syndicate agents through quantum consciousness scanning, track infiltration technology across multiple dimensions, and coordinate actions across hundreds of star systems with perfect precision. But it was not their capabilities that shocked the galaxy. It was their absolute ruthlessness in deploying them. Human teams infiltrated syndicate strongholds with the casualness of maintenance workers. They walked into situations that should have been impossible to survive and emerged with complete intelligence packages. When conventional tactics proved insufficient, they implemented what they called conversion protocols, methods of turning syndicate technology against itself that require the human operators to sacrifice their own consciousness to achieve. Within 6 months, the Phantom Syndicate's leadership was dead. Within 12 months, their infrastructure was completely dismantled. Within 18 months, every trace of their organization had been eliminated from the galaxy. The humans had not simply defeated an enemy that had paralyzed galactic civilization. They had erased it so completely that future historians would struggle to find evidence that it had ever existed. The final report was delivered by Director Kim, who now showed signs of the modifications that had become standard among human debt payment specialists. Her eyes held patterns that indicated cybernetic enhancement, and her voice carried harmonic undertones that suggested neurological restructuring. "Counselors," she announced, "the Phantom Syndicate has been eliminated. All agents have been neutralized, all technology has been secured or destroyed, and all infiltration of galactic governments has been reversed. This operation is complete." Zexai accessed the verification data that had been pouring in from across the galaxy. Every report confirmed the same impossible conclusion. The Syndicate was simply gone. Not defeated, not retreated, but eliminated so thoroughly that they might never have existed. "What was the cost?" he asked, though he was not certain he wanted to know the answer. "Acceptable," Director Kim replied. "We lost approximately 200,000 volunteers, plus necessary infrastructure sacrifices. 3 human colonies were voluntarily destroyed to prevent Syndicate escape routes, and approximately 50 million humans underwent irreversible modifications for operational effectiveness." The numbers were staggering. Humanity had sacrificed populations larger than most species' entire civilizations to eliminate a threat to galactic security. "Why?" Counselor Vorth asked, his patterns showing genuine bewilderment. "Why would you pay such a price for obligations that were never formally requested?" Director Kim turned to face him directly, and her modified eyes seemed to look through him rather than at him. "Because we owe a debt," she said simply, "and humans always settle their debts." The session ended with the council in stunned silence, trying to process what they had witnessed. Humanity had transformed itself into a weapon capable of eliminating threats that the galaxy's greatest powers could not even effectively identify. They had done so voluntarily, without being asked, and had treated the tremendous cost as simply the price of honor. Zexai remained in the chamber long after the others had departed, reviewing data and trying to understand what the Galactic Council had created when they chose to save a single human colony 7 years earlier. The humans were making it increasingly clear that their concept of debt was far more comprehensive than anyone had anticipated. They seemed to believe that being saved from extinction created an obligation not just to those who had helped them, but to galactic civilization as a whole. More disturbing was the growing evidence that they were preparing for threats that had not yet materialized, modifying themselves in anticipation of crises that might never occur, because they believed their debt extended to preventing any future harm that might come to those who had shown them mercy. Zexai activated his personal records and began documenting his observations, knowing that future historians would need to understand the sequence of events that had led to humanity's transformation. But as he worked, one question continued to trouble his consciousness. If this was how humans responded to a single act of kindness, what would they become when they decided their debt was fully paid?